All right, welcome back for Unit 5 of AP World History Review. Speaking of which, I think it's time for a change.
No, Cain, don't change. We like you just the way you are.
And you're great too, random hypothetical student. But no, I'm not changing. Nothing's changing. The only thing that's changing is stuff in history. That's the theme of Unit 5.
Both Units 5 and 6 cover the period 1750 to 1900, or as many historians call it, the dawn of the modern era.
There are three major changes that take place in Unit 5. The first is social, the second is political, and the third is economic. You know them better as the Enlightenment, Nationalism, and the Industrial Revolution. Those are our three themes for Unit 5 within the context of changes, and we're going to review them real quick.
The Enlightenment is our first area of change in the modern era, and it's truly a continuation of events that were set in motion by both the Renaissance and the Scientific Revolution.
This time of extreme change is the foundation for the other two changes that we're going to unpack later in the video. And simply put, the Enlightenment is when people, specifically Europeans, really start to think about stuff. Now, I know that sounds very basic in general. People have always been thinking, it's what we do. But it's at this time that Europeans turn their focus to the idea of reason. All humans are gifted the ability to reason. It's the reason why we are what we are. But during the Enlightenment, people truly start to access that, and they start to ask questions about why things are the way that they are. And these questions can be about politics, the economy, religion. All sorts of things are being questioned because people want answers. It's a very natural human characteristic. During the Enlightenment, people start to find those answers.
There isn't one particular person at the heart of the Enlightenment, but if we were to give credit to one philosopher, it's probably John Locke. Locke was a proponent of human reason, specifically with his belief in the idea of tabula rasa, or blank slate, that every human is a blank slate at birth on which they can write whatever they want. He also introduced the concept of all humans having certain basic rights, specifically life, liberty, and property, but we'll unpack that later on.
A major theme and tenet of the Enlightenment is the idea of empiricism, that learning happens through experience, and the only way you can truly learn something is by doing it yourself. So during this time, many people are going to think for themselves and discover many things about the world and challenge old assumptions about the world.
These reason-based thinkers were known as Philosophes, and they challenged the old assumptions about politics, economics, and just social life in general. France became a hotbed for Enlightenment thinkers, and many of them met in places called salons, where they would exchange new ideas and talk about reason.
One area of life that's definitely challenged is social classes and societal structure. For example, during this time, slavery is challenged by the abolitionist movements both in the United States and in England. For the most part, most European countries are going to begin to move away from traditional coerced labor and slavery.
The Enlightenment brought many changes, such as the role of women. Women became more independent because of Enlightenment thinking and often fought for the right to vote and the right to hold jobs. Social orders were also challenged as Russia ended serfdom, being the last major country to use the feudal system.
So it's safe to say because of the Enlightenment, people are gaining more freedoms. It really goes back to John Locke's ideas of basic rights. You have the right to your life, your liberty or freedom, and your property. And actually one of the other challenges is the assumptions of what stuff is mine? What can I do with my stuff? It's an economic question.
Adam Smith wrote a revolutionary book called The Wealth of Nations, which introduced capitalist principles and the idea of laissez-faire, which meant hands-off, meaning the government shouldn't be involved in the money and the economics of common people.
And shocker here, people loved capitalism. Completely disregarded the old feudal system where what you made went back to an authority. Now, what you make is yours and you can do with it whatever you want. It's your money. Invest it how you choose. And during the Enlightenment, since we're challenging everything, we might as well challenge those exact people that are ruling. Absolutism had been in use for hundreds of years, so it's natural that during the Enlightenment, people are going to question whether or not the system actually works and whether or not it's fair.
One example is the author Thomas Hobbes, who wrote the book Leviathan, which painted the government as a monster and questioned whether or not having government control was actually necessary.
Now, Hobbes and many other philosophers like him agreed that government is in fact necessary because that's what protects your basic rights, those same things that Locke encouraged. But government should be restricted so that it doesn't actually restrict your rights in the process. Because of this, Hobbes believed in something called the social contract. In this hypothetical document, you sign an agreement that as a citizen, there's certain things you won't do and rights you give up in order to receive the overall benefits of being a citizen and being protected by the government. So while the Enlightenment recognized that government is necessary, the change comes in that maybe there's better ways to go about government that are more fair and better for the people.
A philosopher named Baron Montesquieu challenged the ways in which government had always been done before, specifically the absolute power system, encouraging a separation of powers that had three branches of government, very similar to what we see in the United States today. What you need to know about the Enlightenment is pretty simple. It promotes reason and secularism and overall change, and it really has formed new political ideologies, which will be the basis of our next category, nationalism, an extreme sense of pride for your state and a belief that the ideals of your state should be pursued above all else.
Nationalism is certainly a change because we've never in world history seen a pride for a state or a group of people at this proportions. And much of that is because of the new ideas and challenges that came out in the Enlightenment about how government should work. So nationalism will do two things in this period, two major changes. It's going to cause political revolutions, and it will also cause unification of different groups.
While absolutism certainly had been resisted in the past, the American Revolution of the American colonies against England was the first example of the lesser people being successful in their revolution.
Now, I could rehash your entire middle school history experience and go through all the steps of the American Revolution, but I'm just going to cover the big points that pertain to the overall global tapestry that is AP world history.
Many of these nationalist revolutions during this time period are encouraged by revolutionary documents. In the American Revolution, the most famous was the Declaration of Independence, which not only declared independence, but outlined what a new independent free state should look like. And very similarly, Thomas Paine's Common Sense also encouraged American colonists to fight back against the British because they had been wronged.
Now, we all know the US had no business winning this revolution, but the fact of the matter is they did. And what we got is the first true state to be built on Enlightenment principles, a major change in world history.
The end result of the revolutionary new United States of America was a new state that was governed on Enlightenment principles, specifically governed by a constitution, a governing document. Having such a document is a new concept, and it puts limits on what the government can actually do and allows for more freedom within a society.
Now, naturally, once other nations see the success that the American Revolution had, other groups of people will try to resist the absolute powers. Hey, if we know anything about world history, it's a copycat world. Now, you might remember that France had a very corrupt absolute style of system. It had three social classes or estates, and they were very unfair. In the first estate, you had the church. In the second estate, there was the nobility. The third estate consisted of all the peasants and the workers. And for years, France's society had been built off the backs of these peasants. And now, with the success of the American Revolution, which the French helped, by the way, French citizens are beginning to revolt against that absolute system.
By 1789, representatives from the Third Estate, which now called themselves the National Assembly, met in the tennis courts of Paris and vowed to never give up meeting until they formed a new government with a new constitution.
France even had its own revolutionary document inspired by the Enlightenment called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. More so to outline the basic rights that these French citizens believed they all had and that they had been restricted from by the government. So it seemed like there was a path to a successful revolution.
However, the French citizens decided to take matters in their own hands because they were impatient and stormed the Bastille in 1789, leading to widespread conflict throughout the city of Paris.
Just your typical reign of terror with a bunch of heads getting chopped off, including the king's.
Out of the chaos, a young French military officer named Napoleon Bonaparte was able to seize power and actually bring France back to absolutism.
Napoleon was a brilliant military strategist, and the process brought a number of victories to France and also structured France at a time where it really needed it and protected the Enlightenment with new laws and new systems that truly promoted individual rights.
But unfortunately for Napoleon, he invaded Russia in winter and was completely humiliated, and then he got exiled, and then he came back, and then he was humiliated again at Waterloo and was exiled again. And that ends this brief moment in time in which France returned back to absolutism, the same thing they tried to avoid within the French Revolution. But I digress.
Classic France. Oh, and by the way, never invade Russia in winter. Well, you know what? Just don't invade Russia. Just don't do it. It's a bad historical trend. Spain's colonial empire also faced a series of nationalist revolutions, including successful ones in Mexico, as well as the more famous Latin American revolutions.
The most successful revolutions against the Spanish were in Latin and South America, led by a leader named Simón Bolivar, who was able to unite through use of words and military success while Spain was distracted by the events of Napoleon back in Europe. The result was a new coalition of independent Spanish-speaking states in Latin and South America called Gran Columbia.
But then Simón Bolivar died, and a year later, all the countries were like, let's do our own thing. But nationalism didn't just start revolutions, it also brought similar people together in unified states. There's two big examples of this during this unit, Italy and Germany. We're just going to focus on Germany because that's the big one. To this point in world history, there has never been a state called Germany. There's been a bunch of smaller states that all speak German, but there was no Germany. Germany has been ruled by places like Prussia, Austria, Hungary, and the Holy Roman Empire. During this unit, Germans come together and form what is now Germany.
First attempt to create a unified German state was at the Frankfurt Assembly in 1848, which failed because many of the Prussians disagreed on who their ruler should actually be.
Enter Otto von Bismarck, the Prime Minister of Prussia, who tried to unite Germany together under industrialism and warfare. He attacked France and brought all these states together and created Germany as we know it.
Bismarck's efforts resulted in the coronation of Kaiser Wilhelm I, who sparked the first true German empire, a threat to the rest of Europe, as we'll unpack later on.
And boy, did Germany screw everything up for everyone else. But we don't have time for that right now.
What you need to know about nationalism is it's probably the most important effect of the Enlightenment. It's truly the Enlightenment ideals in actions, and it created new independent countries thanks to the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Latin American Revolution, and it also unified new countries like Germany. And overall, we have a shift away from that old order of absolutism, more of a pride and sense of unity within common people than we've ever had before. But the greatest change during this time period is certainly the Industrial Revolution.
The Industrial Revolution, or the overall shift to a production-based economy rather than an agricultural economy, is truly a result of human nature. We know this. Humans are lazy and they are jerks. And they don't really want to work hard to get stuff. Enter machines.
Industrialism started in the cottage industry in England, which put all the steps of making textiles under one roof. As technology increased, less of the labor was done by humans and was replaced by machines, generally powered by water.
The agricultural revolution of the late 1700s meant that food was readily available. So the entire lower class no longer needed to just be farmers. There were new opportunities, and factories provided that. And eventually the invention of the steam engine allowed for these factories to be built outside of water.
But in order to create steam, you need something that burns very hot and very quick, and that answer was coal, which created a whole new industry and certainly fueled industrial growth worldwide. Steam engines not only powered factories, they also powered locomotives and steamboats, allowing for a new level of transportation and connection worldwide.
Quickly, the Industrial Revolution spread outside of England to places like the United States and France, Belgium, and Germany. Factories were now the hot ticket item. It's where people wanted to work. They provided regular jobs and regular hours that were relatively easy and gave you a salary. We mentioned how important capitalism was earlier, so you can imagine why people are flocking to the factories. And as the second industrial revolution takes place, factories begin to produce other types of goods besides textiles and become truly the backbone of the economy. More changes take place that technically make life a little bit easier.
Including steel, which had been founded by a man named Henry Bessemer and certainly changed infrastructure throughout the world. By the time the second industrial revolution rolled around, advancements in electricity allowed for easier power and advancements in communication and overall human comfort. Those advances in electricity led to the creation of inventions like the telegraph, the telephone, and the radio, which made communication almost instantaneous.
So the economy, transport, and communication have been completely changed by the Industrial Revolution. But it also changes life.
As factories grew and labor was in higher demand, people flocked to cities for those new jobs, which triggered an unprecedented rate of urbanization around the world. The rate of human migration in world history has never been higher as people sought better lives and better opportunities, especially in these factory systems. Industrialism had effectively created a new social class, the working class. And while this class had more status than the peasants of feudalism in past ages, as factory life normalized, poverty rates actually went up. And almost all family members, yes, including children, were expected to work.
And we could go on for hours about how the conditions of these factories actually were, but I'll summarize it for you. They sucked. A new wealthy middle class was also created for the people that worked jobs that were a little more specialized. So we have just as much discrepancy in the levels of social classes as we've always had. And it turns out these conditions in these cities, they're terrible. They ran out of room quickly and things were just too cramped. Not to mention we hadn't figured out sanitation or how to build a city with a grid. Many of these changes come through urban renewal movements, and that's just one series of changes that takes place to make life better for the common worker.
This is why during the middle of the Industrial Revolution, challenges to the way the factory system and labor system worked came about. Labor unions became popular as they fought for the rights and safe conditions and fair pay and equal benefits for all workers in factories, and many workers often rioted or protested and refused to work unless they got better conditions. It's at this time that the ideas of Karl Marx from his book, The Communist Manifesto, become more popular in urban areas throughout the world. Many working class people resonated with the ideas of socialism, which put the means of production and control of the economy in the hands of the actual workers and promoted an eventual social revolution that would lead to an equal classless society.
It becomes clear that industrialism is the way of the future. And for every state around the world, they have one of two options. They can embrace it and succeed, or they can resist and really fall apart.
Japan, who was mostly isolated throughout world history, became more industrialist after the United States became involved in the late 1800s. And during this time called the Meiji Restoration, truly became a world power because of its embracing of industrialism. In China, the Qing Dynasty refused to embrace industrialism, and because of that, fall victim to European influence and imperialism, but we'll talk about that in our next unit review. The Ottoman Empire had also refused industrialization, often being known as the sick man of Europe because of how behind it was. The Ottomans did attempt industrial reform within the Tanzimat reforms, but these reforms were a little late, and following the outbreak of World War I, the Ottoman Empire succumbed to the Young Turk movement and revolution in Turkey. What you need to know about the Industrial Revolution is that it changed the way things were produced. It created a new working class and moved production almost completely to factories, triggering widespread urbanization and truly a capitalist structure worldwide.
Unit 5 might be the biggest and even most important unit in all of AP world history. Because of these three major changes, the world is never going to be the same, and it will directly impact the rest of the trajectory of world history. And we'll continue to unpack that next time in Unit 6. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.